Necka stood at the international airport's arrivals gate, her heart pounding fiercely. After 5 long years of working double shifts as a nurse in London, she was finally home. Necka clutched her suitcase, brimming with toys, colorful clothes, and sweets for her 2 children, Sarah and Toby. Necka had sent every extra penny she earned back home to her Auntie Agnes. In her mind, she pictured her children living like royalty in Agnes's big house. She imagined them growing tall, eating the best food, and attending the finest private schools. The sacrifice of being away had been painful, but the thought of their happy faces kept her going through the cold English winters. She didn't call ahead because she wanted to see their shocked, joyful expressions when she walked through the door. Necka hopped into a taxi, humming a sweet lullaby. As the car drove through the familiar dusty streets of her village, she looked out the window with a wide smile. However, as they approached Auntie Agnes's gated compound, a strange feeling washed over her. The once bright blue gates were peeling and rusted. Thorny weeds had overgrown the flower beds she had paid to have maintained. The taxi driver dropped her off, and Necka stood before the gate, noticing a heavy padlock hanging from the outside. The house felt cold, quiet, and strangely abandoned. Necka knocked loudly on the metal gate, but no one answered. She called out for her children, but only the wind replied. Panic began to rise in her throat like a bitter pill. She decided to walk around the perimeter of the fence toward the back entrance. As she reached the rear of the property, she heard a muffled, rhythmic thumping sound. It wasn't coming from the main house but from a small, dilapidated mud shed used for storing old wood and chicken feed. Necka's breath hitched. She pushed through the tall grass and saw Auntie Agnes standing by the shed door, looking nervous. Agnes was wearing a dress made of expensive lace, fabric that Necka's hard-earned money had clearly bought. When Agnes saw Necka, she didn't run to hug her. Instead, she turned pale and blocked the doorway of the shed. Her eyes darted around, looking for an excuse. "Necka, you didn't tell us you were coming," Agnes stammered, her voice shaking. Necka ignored the fake greeting. "Where are my children, Auntie? Where are Sarah and Toby?" Agnes forced a dry laugh and smoothed her expensive dress. "Oh, they are at a very prestigious boarding school in the city. They are doing so well, but they aren't allowed visitors until next month." Necka looked down and saw a tattered, dirty doll lying in the dirt near Agnes's feet. It was Sarah's favorite doll. Necka knelt and picked up the doll. It was covered in red stains that looked like ink, and its hair had been hacked off. "If they are at school, Agnes, why is Sarah's doll bleeding red ink in the dirt?" Necka's voice was low and dangerous. Agnes began to sweat, but before she could answer, a black luxury car pulled into the driveway. A man in an expensive suit, a wealthy land developer, stepped out. He looked impatient and held a thick stack of papers. Agnes immediately turned her attention to him, acting as if Necka was just a common servant. "The land is ready, sir," Agnes called out, ignoring Necka's question. "We can sign the papers today." Necka realized that Agnes was trying to sell the family land, the land that Necka's late father had left for the children. The developer looked at the overgrown yard and the crumbling house with disgust. He wanted to build a massive factory, and he needed this specific plot to complete his project. He didn't care about the family. He only cared about the signature. Agnes hurried the man toward a small table in the yard, desperate to get the money before Necka could interfere. Necka stood in the shadows, her heart breaking. She came to the realization that her aunt's greed was treating her own family like an obstacle, even as she was saving lives in London. The land developer sat down and spread the blueprints across the table. He began talking about soil density, industrial zoning, and environmental lien warnings. Agnes nodded along like she understood, but Necka could see the confusion in her aunt's eyes. Agnes lacked knowledge in legal matters, focusing solely on the financial implications. Necka walked over quietly, carrying a tray of water as if she were a maid. She leaned over to set a glass down and glanced at the contract. Her nursing career in London had required her to study medical law and complex estate documents for patient advocacy. She saw the mistake immediately. The developer was tricking Agnes. The contract had a hidden clause that made the village liable for any chemical spills the factory caused. Agnes would gain wealth for a week if she signed this contract, but the village would face permanent destruction. The terminology on page 4 is incorrect, Neka said calmly, setting the glass down. The developer looked up, startled. Agnes hissed at Neka to be quiet and go inside. Don't mind her, she's just a relative who helps with the cleaning, Agnes lied. But the developer was staring at Neka. What did you say about page 4? He asked. His interest piqued by her clear, confident English. Neka didn't back down. She pointed to a specific paragraph in the fine print. This isn't a standard sale. It's a predatory leaseback agreement. You are using Clause 42B to bypass the environmental protections of this district. The developer's jaw dropped. He had traveled all over the country and had never met a village woman who knew the intricacies of Clause 42B. Agnes tried to grab the papers, screaming that Neka was a liar and a troublemaker. Quiet, Agnes, the developer snapped. He turned back to Neka, his eyes narrowing with respect. Who are you? You don't talk like a cleaner. Neka stood tall, the London sun having taught her to be bold. I am the rightful guardian of this estate, and I am a licensed professional. You are trying to steal this land for a pittance because you think no one here can read your maps. The developer challenged her. If you are so smart, tell me why this soil is worth more than the factory I want to build. Neka didn't hesitate. She remembered her father's lessons about the rare medicinal herbs that grew only on this hillside. She explained the value of the land's natural nutrients and the underground spring that fed the village wells. She showed him that the factory would poison the water, killing the very people he hoped to hire. The developer was silent for a long time. He looked at Agnes, who was trembling with rage, and then at Neka, who stood with her arms crossed. He realized he couldn't bully his way through this deal anymore. You've saved me a lot of legal trouble, lady, the developer said, his tone changing. I didn't realize the environmental risks were that high. My lawyers would have been in court for years. He pushed the contract aside and looked at Neka with newfound reliance. He needed someone who actually understood the land and the law to help him find a better location. Agnes was fuming. She saw her big payday slipping away. She's a thief, Agnes yelled. She's been away for years and knows nothing. But the developer wasn't listening to Agnes anymore. He asked Neka to review a different set of documents for a project in the next town. He even offered her a consultant fee. Neka agreed, but only if she learned the truth about the house. As the developer sat back to wait, a faint scratching sound came from the ground beneath them. It was a hollow sound like someone tapping on wood from deep inside the earth. Neka's blood ran cold. She realized the shed wasn't the only place Agnes was hiding things. Neka ignored Agnes's protests and walked into the main living room. She pushed aside the heavy, expensive rug that Agnes had recently bought. Underneath was a wooden trapdoor with a heavy iron bolt. Neka's hands trembled as she slid the bolt back and pulled the door open. A wave of stale, cold air hit her face. Down in a small, cramped cellar, she saw two tiny figures huddled together on a thin mat. It was Sarah and Toby. They were thin, their ribs showing through their skin, and their eyes were wide with terror. They weren't in a prestigious boarding school. They were being kept like prisoners in a hole. Neka let out a cry of pure agony and jumped down into the cellar. When the children saw her, they didn't run to her at first. They recoiled, shielding their eyes from the light. It's me. It's Mama, Neka sobbed, pulling them into her arms. They felt so light, as if they were made of nothing but feathers and bone. She realized Agnes hadn't just been stealing the money. She had been treating the children as luck charms. Agnes believed that by keeping the children of a successful person in the dark, their mother's luck would flow directly to her. It was a dark, greedy superstition that had cost the children their health and their childhood. Neka carried the children out into the sunlight. They blinked painfully, their skin pale and sickly. The developer stood up. his face filled with horror. He was a businessman, but he was not a monster. He looked at Agnes with utter disgust. Nneka sat on the porch, rocking her children and singing a soft song her own mother had used to soothe her. "I'm here now," she whispered into Sarah's hair. "No one will ever hurt you again." The children finally began to cry, the realization hitting them that their mother was real and not a ghost. Between sobs, Toby whispered, "Auntie Agnes said you died in the big plane. She said if we came out of the hole, the ghosts would take us too." Nneka's heart shattered into countless fragments. Agnes had used fear to keep them silent. She had told them their mother was dead so they wouldn't try to escape or call for help. Every letter Nneka had sent, every photo, every gift, Agnes had burned them all in front of the children, telling them it was trash from a woman who didn't want them. The cruelty was so deep that Nneka couldn't even find words to scream. She just held them tighter, feeling the debt of blood that Agnes now owed her. As the children calmed down, Nneka noticed something else. She saw a stack of papers on the sideboard that Agnes had tried to hide. They were loan documents. Nneka realized that Agnes had used the children's birth certificates and Nneka's power of attorney to take out predatory loans from local moneylenders. Agnes had spent the money on imported lace, expensive jewelry, and tuition for her children to attend top-tier schools in the capital. She had literally traded Sarah and Toby's lives for her children's luxury. The remittance money Nneka sent monthly wasn't enough for Agnes. She wanted to squeeze every drop of wealth out of Nneka's absence. Nneka looked at the legal papers the developer had left on the table. She saw the loophole she had noticed earlier. She came to the realization that she possessed a weapon capable of destroying Agnes without necessitating any physical violence. She looked at her aunt, who was now cowering in the corner of the yard, realizing that her web of lies had finally collapsed. The universe was shifting. Now, the woman who had endured an hour of neglect held all the power. Nneka looked at the developer and said, "I think it's time we talk about who really owns this house." The developer stayed to act as a witness. Nneka called for the village elders to come to the house immediately. She didn't want a private fight. She wanted the community to see what had happened. When the elders arrived, they saw the malnourished children and the luxury items Agnes had bought. The power shift was instant. Agnes, who once walked through the village with her head high, now had to sit on the ground. Nneka presented the loan documents and the land title. "You used my children as collateral for your greed," Nneka said, her voice echoing through the yard. "By the laws of this village and the laws of the state, you have forfeited your right to this property." Because Nneka had inserted the community trust clause into the new agreement with the developer, the land no longer belonged to any individual. It belonged to a board. The elders made Nneka the head of the trust because she was the only one with the right credentials. Agnes was no longer the mistress of the house. She was a guest who had overstayed her welcome. The former dismissers, the neighbors who had ignored the children's cries, now had to bow their heads in shame before Nneka. The social order of the village was being recalibrated right before their eyes. "You have until sunset to take your lace and your jewelry and leave," Nneka told Agnes. The elders nodded in agreement. There was no room for mercy for someone who would put children in a cellar. Agnes began to wail, begging for forgiveness, claiming she did it for the family. But Nneka didn't listen. She watched as the elders helped carry Agnes's expensive furniture out into the street. The village was watching. They saw the successful woman from abroad, not as a source of money to be exploited but as a leader to be respected. The land developer offered to pay for the children's medical checkups as a gesture of goodwill. He realized that Nneka was the kind of person he wanted to do business with. Someone with integrity and brains. Agnes's own children, who had been living in luxury, were called back from their schools. They were shocked to see their mother sitting in the dirt. They came to understand that their cousin's suffering had funded their education. The shame was a heavy weight that Agnes would have to carry for the rest of her life. She had lost her dominance quietly, without a single stone being thrown. She was simply erased from the position of power she had stolen. As the sun began to set, Agnes stood at the gate with a small bag of her belongings. She looked back at the house, her eyes full of bitterness. "You think you've won, Neka," she hissed. "I will return with the law. You can't just kick me out." Neka walked to the gate and handed Agnes a small pouch of coins. "This is the exact amount you spent on the children's gruel for the last year," Neka said. "I am paying you back for your service. Now we are even. If you come back, I will show the police the cellar. I will show them the birth certificates you forged. The law is my friend, Agnes. It is not yours." Agnes looked at the pouch, then at the firm resolve in Neka's eyes. She realized she had no move left. She turned and walked away into the shadows of the evening. The gate clanged shut, and for the first time in 5 years, Neka felt like she could breathe. She went back inside and began the long process of cleaning the house. She threw away the expensive lace and the dark superstitions. She opened every window to let the fresh air in. Her children sat at the kitchen table, eating a real meal of jollof rice and chicken. They were still quiet, but the fear in their eyes was starting to fade. 3 months later, the house looked completely different. The mud shed was gone, replaced by a beautiful garden of medicinal herbs. The main house had been painted a bright, hopeful white. It was no longer just a home. It was the Neka Community Clinic and Learning Center. Neka used her savings and the money from her consultancy with the developer to buy medical supplies and books. She wore her blue nursing scrubs every day, a symbol of her hard work and her transformation from a lowly niece to a community leader. The transformation was not just physical. Neka's posture had changed. She walked with the authority of someone who had faced the darkness and won. The children were thriving. They were back in school, a real school, and their cheeks had become round and healthy again. The village children came to the center every afternoon to learn how to read and write. Neka aimed to ensure that a contract would never deceive anyone in her village once more. She taught the elders about their rights and the value of their land. The community witnessed the change and rallied around her. She was no longer just a woman who sent money from abroad. She was the heart of the village. One afternoon, a motorcade of government vehicles pulled up to the clinic. A high-ranking official stepped out carrying a plaque. Neka had been nominated for a national award for community development and land protection. The news of how she had saved her village from a predatory developer and exposed a child abuser had reached the capital. As the official spoke, Sarah and Toby stood by their mother's side, holding the ribbon. They were dressed in beautiful new clothes, their faces glowing with pride. The official praised Neka for her courage and intellectual mastery. He called her a shield for the vulnerable. Neka accepted the award, but she didn't talk about her success. She spoke about the millions of workers abroad who send money home, trusting that their loved ones are safe. She spoke about the invisible children who suffer when greed takes over. She announced the launch of the Guardian Watch, a program to ensure that the children of migrant workers are checked on by the community. The crowd cheered, and for a moment the world felt just. The state was now honoring a woman who a land developer had once ignored. Neka stood on the porch of her clinic as the sun set on another busy day. She looked out at the village, seeing the lights flickering on in the home she had helped protect. She had turned her pain into a legacy. The children were safe in bed, dreaming of a future they could actually reach. Neka was aware that future generations would recount her story. It was a story of a mother's love, but also a story of the power of knowledge. She showed that being just a nurse or just a woman didn't matter if you had the truth. She established a scholarship fund so that every child in the village could learn the law, ensuring that greed would never find a foothold there again. Her message was clear to everyone watching. Your status doesn't define your value, and your silence is not your fate. To those working far away, she sent a message through the village radio. Your love is a shield, but your voice is the sword. Never let them stay silent. As she closed the clinic doors for the night, she felt a deep sense of peace. The children were home, the land was safe, and the future was bright. The unseen had finally been seen, and the light would never be dimmed again.